I stood in my uniform, watching a bulldozer tear down the barn my grandfather built with his own hands in 1952, while the woman who'd ordered its destruction smiled at me from behind the police tape she'd insisted my own officers put up. "Don't worry, Chief Martinez," she called out over the roar of heavy machinery. "This is all perfectly legal. The HOA has every right to remove non-compliant structures. My name is Elena Martinez, and I've been the chief of police for Riverside County for 8 years. I've dealt with murderers, drug dealers, and every kind of criminal you can imagine. But I'd never encountered anyone quite like Victoria Brennan, the woman who'd spent 2 years systematically destroying everything my family had built on our 40-acre ranch. Victoria had no idea that the absent property owner she'd been harassing through certified letters and legal threats was the same person who controlled every law enforcement officer in the county. She'd assumed I was just another powerless homeowner who'd cave under pressure from her fabricated HOA authority. She was about to learn just how wrong that assumption was. But this story doesn't start with bulldozers and badges. It starts with a promise I made to my dying father, a piece of land that held 4 generations of family history, and a woman who couldn't understand that some things aren't for sale at any price. What Victoria didn't know, what she couldn't have known when she launched her campaign to steal my family's ranch, was that I'd been investigating her HOA for fraud for the past 6 months. And the evidence I'd gathered was about to destroy not just her illegal scheme, but her entire life. Let me take you back to where this nightmare began, because understanding Victoria Brennan requires understanding the paradise she was determined to control. The Martinez Ranch sits on 40 acres of prime California hill country, 20 miles east of downtown Riverside. My great-grandfather, Carlos Martinez, bought the land in 1923 with money he'd saved working the orange groves, back when $40 an acre seemed like a fortune to a man who'd crossed the border with nothing but hope and determination. Carlos built the original adobe house with his own hands, using techniques his father had taught him in Sonora. The barn came later, constructed by my grandfather Miguel in 1952, using lumber milled from oak trees that had grown on the property for centuries. Every board was hand-selected, every joint crafted with the pride of a man building something meant to last forever. For 90 years, the ranch had been our family's anchor. Carlos raised cattle and grew oranges. Miguel expanded the operation, adding horses and cultivating vegetables that fed 3 generations of Martinez children. My father, Roberto, maintained the traditions while adapting to modern farming techniques, always with an eye toward preserving the land for future generations. I inherited the ranch when my father passed 2 years ago, along with his final words, "Mija, promise me you'll never let them take this place. It's not just land, it's our family's soul." I made that promise, even though I wasn't sure who they were at the time. I found out soon enough. The trouble started when Sunset Hills Development bought the Henderson property that bordered our ranch to the east. What had been 200 acres of undeveloped hillside became Sunset Hills Estates, a gated community of McMansions, starting at $1.2 million each. I watched the construction from my kitchen window, heavy machinery carving roads through century-old oak groves, bulldozers pushing aside the natural landscape to make room for houses that looked like they'd been ordered from a catalog. The noise was constant, the dust clouds visible from miles away, and the sense of encroachment felt like a physical weight on my chest. But I was busy with my own life. My job as chief of police demanded 60-hour weeks, and the ranch required constant maintenance that I struggled to keep up with while working full-time in law enforcement. I hired help when I could, but mostly I just tried to preserve what my father had left me while hoping the development would settle into some kind of peaceful coexistence. That hope died when Victoria Brennan moved into the largest house in Sunset Hills Estates. Victoria was everything you'd expect from someone who'd made millions in real estate development before retiring to play HOA president. Perfectly styled blonde hair that never moved in the California wind. Designer clothes that probably cost more than most people's monthly mortgage. And the kind of confidence that comes from never hearing the word no unless it was followed by a settlement check. She drove a white Tesla Model S that she kept spotless despite living on dusty country roads. And she had opinions about everything, especially about properties that didn't meet her vision of suburban perfection. Our first encounter came at the Riverside County Planning Commission meeting, where Sunset Hills was requesting permits for Phase 2 of their development. I attended because Phase 2 would bring the development even closer to my ranch boundary. Victoria spoke with the polished confidence of someone who'd addressed dozens of planning commissions over the years. "We're not just building houses," she told the commissioners. "We're creating a premium community that will raise property values throughout the region. But that vision requires maintaining certain standards." She paused, her eyes finding mine across the room. "Standards that protect our residents' investments from incompatible land uses in the surrounding area." After the meeting, Victoria approached me with what she probably thought was a friendly smile. "You must be the Martinez family," she said, extending a manicured hand. "I'm Victoria Brennan, president of the Sunset Hills HOA. We're going to be neighbors." "Just Elena Martinez," I replied, shaking her hand briefly. "My family's ranch has been here for 90 years. "How wonderful," Victoria said, though her tone suggested she found it anything but wonderful. "All that history must be quite a responsibility to maintain properly." "We manage just fine." Victoria's smile sharpened slightly. "I'm sure you do your best. But maintaining a working ranch next to a premium residential community does present certain challenges for everyone." "What kind of challenges?" "Well, property values, for one thing. Agricultural operations can sometimes create noise, odors, and visual impacts that affect neighboring properties. Our residents have invested significantly in their homes, and they expect a certain quality of life." I should have recognized the threat for what it was. Instead, I just thanked her for her concern and drove home, thinking that would be the end of it. Victoria had very different plans. The harassment started subtly. A county code enforcement officer showed up at my ranch 3 weeks later, responding to a complaint about unpermitted structures and potential health hazards. "Someone reported that you're operating a commercial livestock operation without proper permits," Officer Jenkins explained apologetically. He'd known my family for years and was clearly uncomfortable with the complaint. "I have to investigate, but honestly, Elena, this looks like harassment to me." I showed him around the property, the barn where my grandfather had kept horses for 70 years, the chicken coop that had supplied eggs for 4 generations of Martinez children, the small corral where we'd raised cattle until my father's health declined. "This is clearly a family ranch, not a commercial operation," Jenkins concluded. "Whoever filed this complaint doesn't know what they're talking about." But the complaint was just the beginning. Over the next 6 months, county inspectors visited my ranch 8 times, responding to anonymous reports about everything from illegal waste disposal to zoning violations to fire hazards. Each inspection found nothing wrong. Each inspector apologized for wasting my time. And each report was filed with the same phone number that traced back to a Sunset Hills Estates address. Victoria was using the county bureaucracy to harass me, betting that I'd eventually get tired of dealing with the constant inspections and sell my property to end the harassment. She didn't know she was harassing the person who supervised half the inspectors investigating her complaints. The escalation came when Victoria began sending legal notices to my ranch address, claiming that my property was subject to Sunset Hills HOA authority due to its location within the expanded community boundaries. The first notice arrived on official HOA letterhead, demanding that I attend a mandatory property compliance meeting to discuss violations of community standards. According to the letter, my ranch violated multiple HOA regulations, unapproved agricultural structures, my grandfather's barn, excessive outdoor storage, farm equipment, non-compliant fencing, the wooden rail fence my father had built, unauthorized livestock keeping, my 3 horses, failure to maintain approved landscaping, native plants Vs, suburban lawns. The letter included a fee schedule. Each violation carried a fine of $500 per day until corrected. Total estimated fines, $73,000. I called the phone number on the letterhead and asked to speak with Victoria. Mrs. Brennan, I received your letter about HOA compliance. My ranch isn't part of your development. Actually, Elena, it is now, Victoria replied smoothly. We've expanded our community boundaries to include all properties within the Sunset Hills Planning District. It's all perfectly legal. I never agreed to join your HOA. You didn't need to agree. The expansion was approved by the County Planning Commission as part of our Phase 2 development. All properties within the district boundaries are automatically subject to our community standards. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. Victoria, you can't just declare authority over someone else's property. I'm not declaring anything. The authority already exists. You just weren't paying attention when it was established. Victoria's voice took on the tone of someone explaining something obvious to a slow child. Elena, I understand this is overwhelming. Managing a ranch while trying to meet community standards is a big responsibility. That's why I'm prepared to make you a very generous offer for your property. I'm not selling. You might want to reconsider. The fines alone will cost you more than $70,000, and that's just for the current violations. Once we complete our assessment, the total could be much higher. Victoria, this is extortion. This is community governance, she replied coldly. And if you choose not to participate voluntarily, we have other options for ensuring compliance. She hung up without saying goodbye. That night, I sat on my porch looking out over the land my great-grandfather had carved from hillside scrub, where my grandfather had built structures that had sheltered our family for 70 years, where my father had taught me that some things were worth fighting for no matter what they cost. Victoria thought she was dealing with some powerless rancher who'd cave under legal pressure. She thought she could steal 4 generations of family history using fabricated HOA authority and bureaucratic intimidation. What Victoria didn't know was that she'd just threatened the wrong person. And while she'd been playing games with fake legal notices and county inspectors, I'd been building a case that would destroy not just her HOA scheme, but her entire criminal enterprise. Because you see, Victoria Brennan had made one critical error in her campaign against my family's ranch. She'd assumed I was just another victim instead of the one person in Riverside County with the authority to investigate HOA fraud as a criminal matter. And I was about to show her exactly what happened when someone tried to steal from a cop. The morning after Victoria's ultimatum, I made a decision that would change everything. I decided to investigate the Sunset Hills HO, and not as Elena Martinez, the rancher, but as Chief Elena Martinez, law enforcement officer. I started by pulling the county records for Sunset Hills Estates development. What I found was the first crack in Victoria's facade of legitimacy. The original development approval included no mention of expanded HOA boundaries beyond the subdivision itself. The Planning Commission had approved Sunset Hills as a standard-gated community with authority only over the properties within the development boundaries. There was no legal basis for Victoria's claim that my ranch had been incorporated into their HOA jurisdiction. I made copies of all the development documents and started a new file, Sunset Hills HOA Investigation of Fraudulent Claims. If Victoria wanted to play legal games, she was about to learn that I had resources she'd never imagined. But Victoria wasn't done escalating the pressure on what she thought was a defenseless ranch owner. 3 days after our phone conversation, I came home from work to find surveyor's stakes dotting my property. Bright orange flags marked a grid pattern across my pastures, including areas where my horses grazed and where my father's vegetable garden had flourished for 30 years. I called the surveying company immediately. "We have a work order from the property owner," the dispatcher told me. Mrs. Victoria Brennan hired us to survey the parcel for development assessment. "Mrs. Brennan doesn't own this property." "I do." "Ma'am, I'm looking at the paperwork right now." Mrs. Brennan provided documentation showing she has legal authority to conduct surveys for HOA compliance purposes. Documentation. What documentation could Victoria possibly have? That afternoon, I drove to the county clerk's office to check the property records. What I found made me understand just how elaborate Victoria's scheme had become. Someone had filed a mechanics lien against my ranch for unpaid community assessments and compliance fees. The lien was for $127,000, nearly twice the amount Victoria had originally threatened, and according to the filing, if it wasn't satisfied within 60 days, the HOA could force a sale of the property. The paperwork looked official. It referenced specific sections of California HOA law. It included detailed accounting of alleged violations and accumulated fines dating back 18 months to before Victoria's HOA had even claimed authority over my property. But there was one problem with Victoria's elaborate fraud. I knew HOA law better than she thought I did. As chief of police, I'd dealt with dozens of HOA disputes over the years. I'd investigated fraudulent liens, illegal foreclosures, and property theft schemes that used fake HOA authority to steal people's homes. I knew exactly what legitimate HOA enforcement looked like, and this wasn't it. Victoria had made several critical errors in her forged documents. She'd cited HOA statutes that didn't apply to properties outside of subdivision boundaries. She'd claimed authority that required homeowner consent she'd never obtained. And she'd backdated violations to periods when her HOA had no legal existence. But most importantly, she'd committed multiple felonies in the process. Filing false liens is grand theft. Forging legal documents is a felony. Using fraudulent paperwork to attempt property theft is organized crime, and doing it all while impersonating legitimate HOA authority made it racketeering. I had enough evidence to arrest Victoria immediately, but I wanted to understand the full scope of her operation before I acted. That evening, I called my detective sergeant, Mike Rodriguez, and asked him to run a quiet background check on Victoria Brennan and Sunset Hills development. "Chief, is this related to an active investigation?" Mike asked. "It might be. Someone's been filing fraudulent liens against county properties, and I want to know if it's part of a larger pattern." Mike's report came back 2 days later, and it was worse than I'd imagined. Victoria Brennan had been investigated for HOA fraud in 3 other counties over the past 5 years. No charges had ever been filed, but the pattern was identical. She'd buy property near existing homes, create fake HOA authority over neighboring properties, then use fabricated violations and liens to force sales at below-market prices. "Chief, this looks like a professional property theft operation," Mike reported. "She's got a lawyer in San Diego who specializes in lien foreclosures, a surveying company that provides documentation for her fake boundary claims, and a network of contractors who bid on forced property sales." How many properties are we talking about? In Riverside County alone? At least 6 families have lost their homes to Sunset Hills liens in the past 2 years. All of them were older residents with paid-off properties who couldn't afford legal fights. I felt something dark and cold settle in my chest. Victoria wasn't just trying to steal my ranch. She was running a criminal enterprise that targeted vulnerable homeowners throughout the region. "Mike, I want you to start a formal investigation. Financial fraud, conspiracy, racketeering, the works. And I want complete surveillance on Victoria Brennan and everyone associated with Sunset Hills development. What about your ranch situation, Chief? Are you going to arrest her now? I thought about it for a long moment. Not yet. I want to let her dig the hole deeper. Sometimes the best way to catch a criminal is to let them commit more crimes while you're watching. It was a decision I'd regret sooner than I expected. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of heavy machinery. From my bedroom window, I could see a convoy of trucks and equipment carriers pulling up to my property line. Victoria's white Tesla led the procession like a general commanding an invasion. I dressed quickly and walked outside to find my ranch being surrounded by contractors with surveying equipment, soil testing gear, and what appeared to be tree removal equipment. "What's going on here?" I called out to the crew supervisor. "Property assessment and preparation," he replied, consulting a clipboard. "We're here to evaluate the land for development compliance. This is private property. You don't have permission to be here." The supervisor looked confused. "Ma'am, we have a work order from the HOA. They said the property owner was notified." Victoria stepped out of her Tesla, wearing the expression of someone about to deliver bad news she was secretly enjoying. "Elena, I'm sorry it's come to this," she said, approaching with two men in business suits, who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. "But you left us no choice." "No choice about what?" "The lion foreclosure process has begun. Since you've refused to pay the community assessments, the HOA is exercising its legal right to prepare the property for sale." One of the men in suits cleared his throat. "Mrs. Martinez, I'm James Powell from the foreclosure mediation firm. According to our records, you've been properly notified of the outstanding debt and the foreclosure timeline." I looked at the paperwork he handed me. It was an official-looking notice of foreclosure proceedings, complete with court filing numbers and legal references. But I knew something James Powell didn't know. The court filing numbers were fake. I checked them the day before. "Mr. Powell, what court issued this foreclosure order?" "The Riverside County Superior Court, Civil Division." "And what judge signed the order?" Powell looked at his paperwork. "Judge Margaret Chen." Judge Margaret Chen had been dead for 3 years. I smiled for the first time in weeks. "Gentlemen, you might want to step back from this property line. You're about to become accessories to a felony." Victoria's confidence faltered slightly. "Elena, this is all perfectly legal. If you interfere with the foreclosure process, you'll be arrested." "Will I?" I asked quietly. "And who exactly is going to arrest me?" I pulled out my badge and held it where everyone could see it. "I'm Chief of Police Elena Martinez, Riverside County Sheriff's Department, and all of you are currently participating in an elaborate fraud scheme that I've been investigating for the past month." The contractors began backing away from their equipment. Powell and his associate looked like they wanted to disappear into the ground. But Victoria just stared at me with the expression of someone watching her entire world collapse. "That's impossible," she said finally. "You're just a rancher. I've been investigating you for 2 years. "No, Victoria. You've been harassing me for 2 years. I've been investigating you for a month. And what I found is going to put you in prison for a very long time." I called Mike Rodriguez and told him to bring backup. "Lots of backup. Chief, are you ready to make arrests?" "Not yet, but I want everyone involved in this fraud operation detained for questioning." "And Mike? Bring the financial crimes unit. We're going to need forensic accountants." As my officers began arriving and the contractors realized they'd been hired to participate in a property theft scheme, Victoria made one last desperate play. "You can't do this," she said, her voice rising to a shout. "I have rights. I have lawyers. I have political connections. You have the right to remain silent, I replied calmly, and I strongly suggest you use it. But Victoria wasn't finished. In fact, she was about to make the mistake that would turn a fraud investigation into something much more serious. Something that would cost her everything she'd built and everything she'd stolen from the families who'd trusted her fake authority. She was about to learn that when you threaten a cop's family legacy, you don't just face arrest. You face justice. The breakthrough that would destroy Victoria's entire criminal operation came from the most unexpected source, her own arrogance. While my officers were interviewing the contractors and foreclosure company representatives, Victoria made a phone call that she thought was private. But she made it standing next to Detective Rodriguez's patrol car, which was equipped with recording equipment that captured every word. "Jonathan, we have a problem," Victoria said to whoever answered. "The Martinez woman is a cop. We need to accelerate the timeline." There was a pause while she listened to the response. "I don't care what it costs," Victoria continued. "Use the Berkeley option. Make it look like environmental contamination. We'll file for emergency condemnation and clean up the mess later." Another pause. "Just do it. And make sure the paperwork looks official. We can't afford any more mistakes." Detective Rodriguez looked at me with raised eyebrows. "Chief, what's the Berkeley option?" I didn't know, but I had a feeling we were about to find out. That afternoon, while Victoria was being processed for booking on fraud charges, I received a visit from Dr. Patricia Jennings, a soil contamination specialist from the County Environmental Health Department. "Chief Martinez, I'm sorry to bother you, but we've received a report of possible toxic contamination on your property. We need to conduct immediate testing to determine if there's a public health risk." I looked at the official-looking paperwork Dr. Jennings handed me. It appeared to be a legitimate environmental assessment order, complete with county seals and urgent language about potential groundwater contamination. But something felt wrong. Dr. Jennings, who reported this contamination, an anonymous tip came in this morning. Someone claimed they'd seen evidence of illegal chemical disposal on your ranch. What kind of evidence? Dead vegetation, unusual soil discoloration, possible petroleum products in your creek. I walked Dr. Jennings around my property, showing her the healthy pastures where my horses grazed, the clear creek that had run clean for 90 years, the vegetable garden where my father had grown food for our family until the year he died. "Doctor, does this look like contaminated land to you?" Dr. Jennings looked around with obvious confusion. "Honestly, no. Everything looks perfectly healthy. But we still need to do the testing to rule out contamination." "Of course. But Dr. Jennings, can I ask you something? How often do you receive environmental complaints about rural properties that are about to go into foreclosure?" "Well, that's..." She paused, thinking. "Actually, never. Environmental complaints usually come from neighbors who are concerned about health impacts." "And who are my neighbors?" Dr. Jennings looked toward Sunset Hills Estates, where Victoria's mansion dominated the hillside like a monument to suburban excess. "Chief Martinez, are you suggesting this complaint might not be legitimate?" "I'm suggesting that someone might be using your department to harass me, just like they've been using code enforcement, surveying companies, and foreclosure mediation firms." I showed Dr. Jennings the fake Lion documents and explained Victoria's systematic campaign to steal my property through fabricated legal authority. "This is incredible," she said after reviewing the paperwork. "But Chief, if this complaint is fraudulent, then someone has committed a felony by filing false reports with a county agency." "Doctor, would you be willing to help me prove that?" What we discovered over the next week changed everything. Dr. Jennings conducted legitimate soil and water testing on my ranch and found exactly what I'd expected: no contamination, no chemical residue, no environmental hazards of any kind. My property was pristine. But when she tried to trace the source of the anonymous complaint, she discovered something disturbing. The report had been filed using forged County Environmental Department letterhead, and the anonymous tipster had provided detailed maps of my property that matched the surveys Victoria's crew had conducted. "Chief, this wasn't just a false report," Dr. Jennings explained. "Someone created fake environmental documentation to support a fraudulent contamination claim. If this had gone through normal channels, your property could have been condemned and seized by the county." Seized for what? Emergency environmental remediation. When the county declares a property to be an environmental hazard, we have the authority to take immediate action to protect public health. That includes condemning buildings, restricting access, and in extreme cases, forcing property sales to cover cleanup costs. I felt pieces clicking into place. "Dr. Jennings, what happens to condemned properties?" "They usually go to public auction. But if there's environmental liability involved, most buyers won't touch them. The properties typically sell for a fraction of their market value." "To developers who specialize in environmental cleanup?" Exactly. Victoria's scheme was even more elaborate than I'd realized. She wasn't just stealing properties through fake HOAs. She was using multiple county agencies to create complex legal situations that forced property owners into impossible positions. File fraudulent HOA violations to create financial pressure. Use fake environmental complaints to create health concerns. Manipulate foreclosure proceedings to force quick sales. Then buy the properties at auction for pennies on the dollar. It was brilliant. It was systematic. And it was completely illegal. But Dr. Jennings had more disturbing news. "Chief, I've been checking with other county departments, and this isn't an isolated incident. Over the past 2 years, we've received environmental complaints about 6 different rural properties. All of them were later sold at foreclosure auctions, and all of them were purchased by the same development company. Sunset Hills Development? That's the one." I called Detective Rodriguez and told him to expand the investigation. "Mike, I want financial records for every property transaction involving Sunset Hills Development. Bank records, auction documents, environmental reports, everything." "Chief, how deep does this go?" "Deeper than I thought. Victoria Brennan isn't just running a property theft scheme. She's corrupted multiple county agencies to create a systematic fraud operation." The scope of Victoria's crimes became clear over the following week as my financial crimes unit traced the paper trail she'd left behind. Sunset Hills Development had purchased 11 properties at foreclosure auctions over the past 3 years, paying an average of 30 cents on the dollar for land that was collectively worth over $4 million. Every property had been the subject of either fraudulent HOA liens or fake environmental complaints. Several had been targeted by both. The victims were exactly what you'd expect: elderly homeowners with paid-off properties, rural families who couldn't afford legal fights, and people like me who Victoria assumed would be powerless against bureaucratic harassment. But the most damning evidence came from Victoria's own financial records. My forensic accountants discovered that Sunset Hills Development had been paying monthly retainers to the foreclosure mediation firm, the surveying company, and a network of contractors who specialized in emergency property remediation. Victoria had essentially created a criminal enterprise with a monthly payroll. More importantly, she'd been sloppy about documenting her crimes. Her business computers contained detailed records of every fraudulent lien, every fake environmental report, and every property she'd stolen through bureaucratic manipulation. "Chief, this is the most comprehensive property theft operation I've ever seen," my lead forensic accountant reported. "She's been running this scheme like a business, with profit projections, target lists, and systematic procedures for stealing people's homes." "What's the total value of the stolen properties?" "Just over $6 million. And that's just in Riverside County." We're getting calls from law enforcement agencies in 3 other counties. We think Victoria might have been operating there too. I sat in my office looking at the evidence files that covered my entire desk. Victoria Brennan had built a criminal empire by exploiting people's trust in government agencies and legal processes. She'd stolen the life savings of dozens of families, destroyed communities that had existed for generations, and corrupted county systems that were supposed to protect citizens from exactly this kind of fraud. But there was one more surprise waiting in Victoria's financial records. Hidden in the Sunset Hills development accounting files was a folder labeled Martinez Ranch Development Plans. Inside were architectural drawings, engineering surveys, and marketing materials for a luxury subdivision called Martinez Hills Estates. Victoria hadn't just been trying to steal my ranch, she'd been planning to erase it completely, bulldozing every structure my family had built over 90 years and replacing it with 57 mansion lots, starting at $1.8 million each. The marketing brochure showed computer-generated images of what my property would look like after development optimization. My great-grandfather's adobe house was gone. My grandfather's barn had been replaced by a clubhouse. The pastures, where 4 generations of Martinez children had learned to ride horses, were covered with swimming pools and tennis courts. At the bottom of the brochure, in elegant script, was Victoria's vision statement, Martinez Hills Estates, where modern luxury meets historic California heritage. She'd planned to steal my family's heritage and then sell it back to wealthy buyers as a marketing concept. That night, I sat on my porch, looking out over the land my family had protected for nearly a century. The barn my grandfather built still stood exactly where he'd placed it in 1952. The oak trees Carlos had preserved when he first cleared the land cast the same shadows they'd cast when I was a child. The creek that had provided water for our cattle still ran clear and cold, just as it had when my great-grandfather first saw this place and knew he was home. Victoria Brennan had tried to take all of that away from me. She'd used lies, fraud, and systematic corruption to steal not just my property, but my family's history. But she'd made one critical error in her elaborate scheme. She'd targeted someone who had the resources to fight back and the authority to seek justice. Tomorrow, I was going to show Victoria exactly what happened when someone tried to steal from the wrong family. And the consequences were going to be far more severe than she'd ever imagined. The confrontation I'd been building toward finally came on a Tuesday morning in October in the Riverside County Superior Court, but not in the way Victoria had planned. Victoria arrived at the courthouse expecting to attend a routine foreclosure hearing where she'd finalize the theft of my ranch. She'd even brought her architect and several potential investors to witness what she assumed would be her victory. Instead, she walked into a courtroom where she was the defendant in a criminal case that would destroy her life. The State of California versus Victoria Brennan, Sunset Hills Development Corporation, and associated defendants, Judge Patricia Morrison announced. Charges of conspiracy, racketeering, grand theft, fraud, and corruption of government agencies. I sat in the gallery watching Victoria's face as the full scope of the charges against her became clear. 18 felony counts. Potential prison sentence of 25 years to life. Asset forfeiture that would strip her of every property she'd stolen and every dollar she'd made from her criminal enterprise. Victoria's attorney, a expensive-looking man in a $1,000 suit, stood to address the court. Your Honor, my client maintains her innocence of all charges. The activities in question were legitimate HOA enforcement actions and property development activities. District Attorney Sarah Chen, who'd been working with my investigation team for the past month, approached the bench with a stack of evidence files that reached nearly to her shoulder. Your Honor, the evidence will show that the defendant has been operating a systematic property theft scheme for at least 3 years, targeting vulnerable homeowners throughout Riverside County and beyond. DHN laid out the case with surgical precision. The fake HO alliance, the fraudulent environmental reports, the corruption of county agencies, the network of accomplices who'd helped Victoria steal millions of dollars worth of property from families who'd trusted government authority. Your Honor, the defendant didn't just commit fraud. She weaponized the legal system itself, turning county agencies and court processes into tools for organized crime. Judge Morrison examined sample documents from the evidence files, her expression growing darker with each page. Mrs. Chen, are you telling me that the defendant has been filing fraudulent liens and environmental complaints with county agencies? That's exactly what we're alleging, Your Honor. And we have documentary evidence, recorded conversations, and financial records that prove the defendant's guilt beyond any reasonable doubt. Victoria's attorney requested a recess to review the evidence, but Judge Morrison denied the motion. Mr. Williams, your client has been committing crimes against this court for 3 years. She's forged legal documents, impersonated government officials, and corrupted the foreclosure process. We're going to deal with this immediately. The next 4 hours were a systematic demolition of everything Victoria had built. DHN presented recorded conversations where Victoria discussed the Berkeley option and other code names for her fraudulent schemes. Financial experts testified about the millions of dollars Victoria had stolen through fake liens and forced property sales. County officials explained how Victoria had manipulated their agencies to create the appearance of legitimate legal action. But the most damaging testimony came from Victoria's own victims. Margaret Patterson, an 82-year-old widow, testified about how Victoria had stolen her family's farm using fake environmental violations. She told me my land was contaminated and dangerous, Margaret said quietly. She said the county would condemn it if I didn't sell immediately. I was so scared, I sold for less than half what it was worth. James Morrison, a retired teacher, described how Victoria had used fraudulent HOA liens to steal the cabin his family had owned for 40 years. We couldn't afford to fight the legal case, he testified. The fines were accumulating faster than I could pay them. Victoria said if I sold to her company, she'd make the fines go away. One by one, Victoria's victims told their stories. Families destroyed by legal costs they couldn't afford. Properties stolen through bureaucratic intimidation. Homes demolished to make room for developments that turned community heritage into profit margins. By the time the last victim finished testifying, Victoria's million-dollar confidence had crumbled into something that looked like recognition of what she'd lost. But DHN wasn't finished. Your Honor, the defendant's crimes go beyond simple theft. She's corrupted county government, destroyed families, and undermined public trust in the legal system itself. DHN presented evidence that Victoria had been paying bribes to county officials, had forged court documents, and had impersonated government agents in her communications with victims.